Welcome to Devils in the Details. I am your host, Annie DeGraw. A message to our viewers before we get started on today's episode. We're discussing two sensitive topics, sexual assault and sexual violence. Please be aware. April is National Sexual Assault Awareness Month, an extremely important topic, particularly on university campuses. Joining us today to talk about this topic, we have Dr. Joanne Vogel, who is the Vice President of Student Services at ASU. And in addition to that, a licensed mental health counselor, a qualified sex therapist, and a trained victim advocate. Dr. Vogel, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this topic today.
Thank you for inviting me.
This is something we've seen in the news for many years, and there's been a lot of changes. You've had a long history, professional history in this space as a victim advocate. Tell me a little bit about how you got into that and your work in that space.
Certainly. So early in my career, I began working with children and adolescents, the majority of them who were in the foster care system for physical abuse, sexual abuse, abandonment, and neglect. I think that was the start of considering what victims needed and those who were vulnerable or had very little voice and choice in their lives, and how to amplify voice, look for options, and give, especially in this example of children and adolescents, as much agency over their own lives, which can be very difficult at that developmental age. After working about 10 years with that population, I moved into the college setting and centralized a health center, counseling center, victim advocacy or confidential advocacy, along with our alcohol, other drug and violence prevention efforts for a college age population, and found that to be just a calling. And so have really enjoyed looking at the ways that we can support, educate, prevent, and then when necessary, provide intervention, support, and care for those who have been victims of violence.
And you've worked with such a span of individuals, from children all the way up through college students. What are some of the misconceptions that you see often about sexual assault, sexual violence, and its victims?
Yeah, I think one of the core things that we've really tried to have people understand is we've done a lot of work to talk about stranger danger and somebody that's going to be attacking you. And certainly we know those crimes do exist. But as many of you watching likely already know, there are many more crimes that occur by people who are known to the victim, whether an acquaintance, a friend, a family member. And I venture to say some of that can be, from a psychological perspective, even more disorienting and confusing, because this is someone that you trust or you know or you love. And then having to make sense of that while someone unknown, it's still very hard and traumatic and difficult to make sense. The complications in the other direction can be a challenge.
And this is really a crime that does not discriminate. It crosses gender lines, race lines, socioeconomic lines. At ASU, what are some of the resources available to both on-campus and off-campus students?
Yeah, so we have a wealth of services. And one of the reasons to talk today is to really make sure that people are aware. On-campus students have access to people if they're living on campus. Community assistants, community directors are all trained to know what to do if a student approaches them, maybe doesn't even want to give details, but needs to be linked to a victim advocate, wants to make an appointment with ASU counseling services or health services. For reporting, it may mean linking the student to the ASU Police Department, our Dean of Students Office through Student Rights and Responsibilities, or University Rights and Responsibilities, depending upon the person who committed the crime. And then for our off-campus students, we also have the option for any of those things that I just mentioned, the victim advocates, the counseling, health, Dean of Students Office, Office of Student Advocacy and Assistance. But our online students, if we talk about those students who are off campus, and our online students have access to something called 360 Life Services, which can take them through the options that they may have nearby. Because I also recognize that not all of our students will be right here in the Valley and able to come in to access those resources here.
Having that diversity of options is so important. Dr. Vogel, can you walk me through the step-by-step process that takes place after a student submits a report of a sexual assault or sexual crime?
Yeah, and this one is where there is a layer of complexity, which I think at times may seem frustrating for people, may be confusing, and might even impede people from thinking about making a report. And that's certainly not what we wish to do. So I'm going to do my best to lay out the different pathways, which can be quite individual depending upon the choices that the individual will make about what they wish to do with either the report or the crime, or in what timing and sequence. And so if a student were to come forward and report to us directly, say through the police department, one of the things that we will do in student services, if we're made aware of the report, is to go ahead and talk to the student when ready about what are the other support services they need. Do you need a note to your professors? Do you have a safe place to be and to stay? Do you need to change rooms? Do you want to explore with someone in a confidential setting, or what I'm describing there through the student advocacy and assistance, something that's not a confidential setting, but does offer and afford students privacy, even if it isn't confidential? One of the other ways we see reports is through the Dean of Students office, someone reporting through student rights and responsibilities. Same array of services will be offered. I probably can't say enough, and I know you shared with the audience that I have trained as a victim advocate. I do really believe that can be a great option for people to consider so that they can be kept informed about the progress of the report, but not have to own that task, if that makes sense. So a victim advocate, which we didn't talk much about yet, can take the person through the options available, weigh out reporting and what that will be like, and prepare someone for that, because part of the training talks about what it will be like to go through a criminal process or an educational college process. And so they can prepare the person for that. In addition, they can say, okay, well, if reporting is not what you wish to do, but you feel like you need psychological care, counseling, someone confidential to speak to, helping to arrange that for the person. And then likewise, if there is a physical health need, testing for pregnancy, testing for sexually transmitted infections, that's another thing a victim advocate can assist in arranging, whether that happens on campus, nearby, or at the place that the person is residing. Wherever is going to be most comfortable, offers the person the most choice and control over the situation, is something a victim advocate will help weigh out. And so I probably can't emphasize enough. I think it is very helpful to have someone like that. And if not a victim advocate, is there a friend or a family member, someone you trust, who has, we hope, familiarity with the things I just discussed, so that do I want to report? Do I need psychological or counseling care? Do I want or need anything for my physical health and well-being? And how do I seek that out? And then the part I mentioned earlier of how taxing that can be for the individual to do for self. Some people will do that, and that's part of their own process, and others need someone to reach out, make those phone calls, collect that information, set up appointments, and then come back to the person with that to take some of the burden off.
And I think at the root of all of what you just mentioned is that no two crimes are alike, no two victims are alike, but it's so important to know that you are not alone in this process. There is someone there who wants to help you. You, in your work and your time in the victim advocacy space, have seen a lot change, I'm sure. What have we seen change in the university space about how they're talking about sexual assault and sexual violence, and what still needs to be done?
Yeah, I think, I've been around long enough to know that there were times when much of this wasn't discussed at all. And so in the last 20, 25 years, I think much progress has been made about talking openly about it, having students undergo required training with regard to sexual misconduct, sexual assault, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. I think we've come a long way in the openness, availability, and I'd say even the mobilization of people to take on this issue and to be passionate about it. You mentioned earlier, it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and what are the things, Take Back the Night, Clothesline Project, Denim Day, all of these incredible things that continue to raise awareness. So I have seen a lot change. And I think simply being open and talking about it has helped. Now, that's insufficient, though. There's all of the other prevention and education that we do around consent, around what it is to, voluntarily, willingly, without coercion, without influence, be able to make choices about our own body. And so I think that we have made gains there too. What I think it has instructed us, though, is that there still needs to be more information, because many people don't actually pay attention until they need it, unfortunately. And then that's when all of a sudden we realize, I don't quite know where to go. And so one of the things I think we could do today is to certainly share our own resources to students. And so if no one has spent time, or if there's a way to look at sexualviolenceprevention.asu.edu, there is a lot of resource there that takes you through everything we've been discussing: confidential resources, non-confidential resources. And that's a great place to go, unfortunately, in a really tough time. But we've worked with students over the last couple of years to improve, enhance, make it easier to navigate. Because you said it, there are lots of different configurations, different needs, different people. And so we've had to write materials to speak to all of them. And that can be exceedingly difficult to accomplish. The other thing that's probably changed is the difference in the federal guidelines and regulations. And so some of us may recall in 2011 when the Dear Colleague letter came out, and others of us are probably very familiar with in 2020 when federal regulations were put into place that also changed up how we investigate and provide process in the Title IX space. So we've seen all of those different changes over the last, some of them 10 years, some of them 20 or 25 years.
It's wonderful to see these changes, because it really is bringing a conversation that for too long has existed in the shadows out into the open. I'm glad you mentioned the ASU website. So many resources for victims that maybe used to be in person have moved online during the pandemic. What type of resources are available online to victims of sexual assault?
Yeah, so the website is a key feature. The other thing we have been able to do in the virtual space or in the online space is students may wish to interact that way because it's easier. And so we've been using Zoom for investigations, for providing support. And so sometimes that makes it easier for someone to get what they need, is not having to physically come into a space. We're also working on, and so I hope by August to debut for the community, is a website and an app that will help students walk through what we talked about earlier is, do I wish to report? Yes or no, or maybe. Would I like counseling or psychological care? Yes, no, maybe. Do I need some type of physical intervention or follow-up? Yes, no, maybe. And it will create an action plan for students. And so we're in progress of working out the fine details, and we owe a lot to one of our own, Dr. Michelle Villegas Gold, who designed this as part of her dissertation project, specific to the resources available to ASU students. And so much credit to the work there, to her work, and we're trying to launch that by August, so stay tuned.
The Tempe City Council has recently discussed creating a victims advocacy center, working very closely with ASU on that project. What types of resources will be available to both victims of sexual assault and survivors?
Yeah, this is a really exciting development for our Tempe community, because the family advocacy centers have existed in other parts or other locations where our students are, in Mesa and Glendale and Scottsdale and Phoenix. And so it's really exciting to see Tempe following suit. And that family advocacy center will have detectives, victim advocates, counseling availability, and then what most often our family advocacy centers are often thought about for is a forensic nurse exam. And so we have had our students in Tempe able to go to one of the other local family advocacy centers, because they are the place in Maricopa County where somebody who wishes to have a forensic exam and have it used for criminal purposes needs to go in order to have that accomplished. So to have that so close or nearby would be a huge resource for our students. It also allows students to make a choice. And I've said this before, my hope of hopes is that students feel confident and comfortable and supported with what we have here for them at ASU. Yet at times, students may not wish to do that right here, and that's okay. My hope is that they find a place to get help. And so family advocacy centers can be that place for students if they need maybe just a bit of distance from the ASU space in order to seek that type of care. So it just offers another option. And I think that's a really great development.
Dr. Vogel, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This is not an easy topic to talk about, but it's so important. Thank you all of our viewers for joining us today. Lots of resources to be found on this topic at asu.edu. Until next time.